Steve Timmons with US Water Systems. In today's video, we'll be reviewing the Defender Whole House Reverse Osmosis System. First, we're going to cover an overview, component identification, unboxing, and what all will be included. In this system we're looking at, it is a 6,000 gallon per day. Really easy way to identify that is by counting the quantity of membranes on the back of the system. Each membrane housing represents 2,000 gallons per day of RO daily production potential. So in this case, with 3 membranes, we have a 6,000 gallon per day. Also, we have our 140 gallon atmospheric tank, our carbon filter, the Bodyguard Plus pre-filter, and our Antiscaleant injection system. Ordinarily, when you receive a system like this, it's going to come on 1 or 2 pallets, depending on if you included a tank or pre-treatment with your system. These systems are modular and customizable. So if you need just the RO, without the UV, without the tank, or with Antiscaleant only, or with a Bodyguard only, that's all possible. The system we're demonstrating today just happens to be one of our most popular configurations. However, the system you may need is contingent on a number of factors: space available at install, the type of water you have, the unique water chemistry, how much water does your home or business need per day. All of these variables need to be taken into consideration before making any whole house RO purchase. Before unboxing and beginning your installation, it's important to inspect your packages. If it arrived on 1 or 2 pallets, inspect thoroughly, look for any damage in the freight process, identify that immediately before you sign and receive. If you do find any damage, call US Water Systems at 800-608-8792 and we'll help get that corrected. Once you've confirmed there's no shipping damage and you have all of the product you need, we can go ahead and begin unboxing. All right, now that we have everything unboxed, let's go through component identification, starting with the first layer of pre-treatment. This is the Bodyguard Plus, specifically a 15 gallon per minute. And to be clear, this is only useful for you if you are on municipal or city water. If you aren't sure if you are, ask yourself, do you pay a water bill? If you do, odds are you're getting your water from a managed municipal source. And these managed municipal sources, they add disinfecting chemicals into the water, most popularly chlorine and chloramine. While these chemicals are good for preventing the spread of diseases like cholera and typhoid, they do have a very negative impact on an RO system's performance. Therefore, it's important to remove that chlorine and chloramine before it enters the RO system. Now, if you're on well water, odds are you don't have these disinfecting chemicals present in your well. So other forms of pretreatment may or may not be necessary. That would all depend on a water test. First, let's identify the components that come with the Bodyguard. Some small assembly is required. First and foremost is the media that goes within the media tank. Here we have gravel, 15 pounds worth, granular activated carbon, 1/2 of a cubic foot. This is used for removing chlorine specifically, and then 1 full cubic foot of catalytic carbon. Now, all carbon is charred coconut shell and has a very strong affinity for removing these chemicals and disinfecting byproducts. That'll ultimately fill this tank. Gravel would go first, and then it would not matter from there what order we add these 2 bags. For this purpose, we've included a funnel. The funnel goes on top of the tank and will make it much easier to fill. It might be helpful to have an extra helper, so as you pour in the media, you have somebody to hold the funnel still and kind of shake the media into the tank. Also included with the Bodyguard valve is 10 feet of drain line to connect your valve to the drain. The most important piece, of course, is the backwashing control valve with Bluetooth compatibility, drain line, and a pre-treatment lockout relay. This is important later on in the install. Also included with the valve is a bypass. Bypass mounts on the back of the valve and allows you to isolate the carbon filter from the rest of your plumbing. Also included is a fittings pack. We have 3/4 inch straight male pipe thread. We have, this is actually very important, a cap that will cover the center distributor tube for when you're filling with media. The purpose of this is we don't want any of the gravel or carbon media to travel down into the center of that tube. It's important to remove it though when you add your valve. We have our transformer for power. We have 1 inch male threaded elbows, which can connect to your bypass and to your plumbing. We have an upper basket, and this is important for preventing carbon media from entering the valve or entering your plumbing. It is basically a strainer that separates the water from the carbon, and it would install on the bottom of this valve, twists and locks into place, which would then eventually center over the distributor tube when we eventually install the valve. And finally, included is a battery backup, which can be installed in the valve. Also included is a packet of silicone lubricant. You'll use this to grease all of the O-rings on the bypass, on the valve, and on the tank. This will prevent any of those O-rings from pinching or rolling. Additionally, you have your owner's manual, which is printed and also available in PDF format digitally. Moving on to the second piece of pre-treatment, this is probably the most frequently used. This is antiscaleant injection, which is used in instances on city or on well water if you have water hardness, the presence of calcium and magnesium, in excess of 5 grains per gallon. Some people use a softener. We find that antiscaleant is a much more cost-effective and efficient method of hardness mitigation before water enters the RO system. Now, while RO systems do remove the broadest spectrum of contaminants, certain contaminants can cause them to reach an early end. Chlorine, chloramine, iron, manganese, and most of all, hardness or scale buildup attributable to the presence of hard water minerals, calcium and magnesium. Going through some quick component identification. First, we have the 15-gallon solution tank. This solution tank is meant to hold our mixture of antiscaleant and pure water. Additionally, we have our dosing pump. The dosing pump will actually plug into the RO system and only run while the RO system is running. Additionally, we have our injection tubing. One of these tubes will run into the inside of the tank. The other tube will actually carry the mixture and inject it directly into the RO system. Also included is a backup pump tube. There is one pump tube already installed. This is redundant and can be used as a backup. In this kit, you get a few parts. You get an injector. This is ultimately the fitting that will tie in the tubing to the RO system. You also get a weighted strainer. The weighted strainer will be installed on the bottom of the tubing within the solution tank. You also get some extra nuts, ferrules, and locking clips for securing the pump. Included as well is 2 32-ounce bottles of HyperGuard 7000 antiscaleant solution. The dilution ratio will vary based on the size of your RO system. In this case, we have a 6,000 gallon per day RO, so the dilution ratio is going to be 3.3 ounces to 1 gallon of pure water, or 49.2 ounces per 15 gallons. Now, by far the biggest and heaviest piece of equipment you're going to receive with this entire system is the RO system itself. Weighing between 250 to 300 pounds, this is probably a 2, maybe a 3-man carry, so if you need to install this in a basement or a mechanical room within the home, think about calling a friend or a helper. Going through some of the parts that are actually come with the system as accessories. First, actually, let's go over the filter wrench. So this filter wrench is used for wrenching the housing of the filter. So there is a sediment pre-filter on this side. As you need to change the filters, you have a handy wrench. You can hang this up behind you. Also included is a UV bulb and a UV quartz sleeve. These are accessories to the UV system on board. Ultraviolet disinfection is meant to disinfect the water of any microbiological impurities. And as additional accessories to the UV bulb, sleeve, and chamber, we have within this bag the UV gland nut and the UV spring. We'll demonstrate how those are installed later in the video. Additional accessories that are included is a 1-inch ball valve, a 1-inch by 2-inch stainless steel nipple, and a 24-inch 1-inch male thread by 1-inch female thread flex connector. These will be used later on in the video for connecting your atmospheric tank to your delivery pump. Also, within this bag, you'll find your owner's manual for the RO system and an owner's manual for your onboard Scala 1 Grundfos delivery pump. Next, we'll go through component identification on the actual RO system. And this is useful whether you are the owner or installer. Knowing all of the components, what purpose they serve, and what they're telling you is important for installation and long-term maintenance. On the front side of the system, you'll see we have two pressure gauges. The top demonstrates your inlet pressure. In other words, the pressure of water feeding the RO system. Below it, we have system pressure. This is telling you the pressure operating within the system after it goes through the onboard booster pump. Up here we have two control valves. The one on top is our recirculation valve, more details on that later, and our waste control valve, which regulates the flow of water to the drain. Also on board, we have 3 flow meters. Each of these sight glasses will tell you what your flow rate is in gallons per minute or liters per minute for any one of your given processes. The furthest on the left is our product flow meter. What this is telling us is how much water the RO system is making at any given time, how much clean water we're making. The waste control valve in the center, the waste flow meter in the center is telling us the flow rate of water traveling to the drain while the system is making water. Recirculation flow meter, furthest on your right, tells us how much water we're able to, if at all, recirculate through the system to maximize efficiency. Also on board, we have our ultraviolet disinfection chamber. This is rated up to 20 gallons per minute to match the flow rate of your delivery pump. This chamber has optional accessory ports for UV sensors, flow meters, other accessories that may be required, and also with the UV is the UV controller. Quick component identification, we have our power, which gives power to both the controller and the UV lamp. This can actually be ran through this porthole in the center. We also have this connection, which will ultimately connect to our UV lamp and gland nut, and we'll get to that as we go through the installation process. Also on board, we have our RO system controller, where we can turn power on and off, and also we have a digital readout for our water quality, which is denoted in TDS, which is an acronym for total dissolved solids. Total dissolved solids is a metric that represents everything in the water that's not water: anions, cations, sodium, hardness, potassium, anything. So the lower this number is, the cleaner your water is. And that can also give you indication of how well the RO system is performing by comparing this TDS after it's traveled through the RO system to the TDS of your water before it's traveled through the RO system. On the back of the system, we have our stainless steel membrane housings, which contain our membrane elements. The membrane elements is really where the magic of RO occurs. This is what reduces the TDS and where water branches off to drain and to your clean water tank. This system happens to be a 6,000 gallon per day RO system. We know that because it has a total of 3 membrane housings. Each membrane housing represents 2,000 gallons per day of potential RO production over 24 hours. Now, we don't want to run an RO system 24 hours, and it's unlikely that we'll actually achieve 2,000 per membrane because of variances in water conditions. More on that as we go. Looking now at the left-hand side of the RO system, we'll go through further component identification. First, we have a 4.5 by 20 5-micron pre-filter. This will be changed in intervals really depending on feed water quality, generally every 6 to 12 months. This is where water enters. So this is our first line of defense as it enters the RO system. Going in order of what's most visible here, we have our product line. So this is where all of our clean RO water will flow through. It's coiled up and zip tied, so that way you can trim it to length or reach a tank that's further away. This is 20 feet of coiled up product line, and ultimately this is going to fill our atmospheric tank where we store our clean water. Similar story further back here inside the frame. We have 20 feet of coiled up tubing, 1/2 inch tubing, for our drain line. So again, 20 feet in case your drain is a further distance away, we can reach it. You can trim that to length if necessary to kind of clean up the install. That's our drain line. Here we have a half-inch ball valve. This is used only when we ship this. Now, prior to us shipping any of these systems, we actually fill the system with a material called glycol. What that does is it prevents the system from damage from either freezing, overheating, and also from bacteria growth. So when you first start this system up, we'll keep all of these valves closed, and ultimately we're going to flush that material out of the system before we bring it online. Moving down to the bottom here, we have our Scala 1 delivery pump by Grundfos. This is up to 22 gallons per minute of flow, up to 60 PSI. There's a number of specs that we can go over, or you can also check out the manual, which we'll drop in the description below. Moving on, we have, I don't know if you can see this, cameraman, our throttle valve. Now, this blue-handled throttle valve is ultimately the mechanism that is going to control our system pressure, because this is on the outlet side of our booster pump, and this making changes to this valve, either opening it more or closing it more, will adjust our system pressure up or down accordingly. Okay, now over here on the other side, the right side of the Defender RO system, we have some more components to identify. So starting up here, we have a female pigtail labeled chem pump. This is going to receive the pump power, or provide power to the Antiscaleant chemical injection pump. So the pump for the Antiscaleant chemical injection will only run when the RO system is making water and is energized. We also have two coiled up wiring harnesses, the first of which is our pre-treatment lockout. So ultimately this will wire to our backwashing filter valve if it's even installed in your system. Again, that can depend on your water quality and what pre-treatment is required. If there happens to be a backwashing filter upstream of this system, these pre-treatment lockout wires come into play. We also have our tank full wires. These two wires will ultimately connect to our float in our atmospheric tank. That float will signal the RO system when to turn off and when to turn on. Here, coiled up in black, we actually have our power for the RO system. So 220 volt single phase power is required. Getting these wires out of the way, we also have our inlet for chemical injection. So if we do have the Antiscaleant system spec'd as pre-treatment to this RO system, this port, which is currently plugged, will be where we place our injector for dosing that Antiscaleant chemical. Over here, we have our pressure switch. This pressure switch is a safety mechanism for the RO system. Minimum feed pressure required to run this RO system is 35 PSI. Anything less can risk airlock for the onboard pump and can risk cavitation on the booster pump. This pressure switch is meant to prevent that failure. Moving down to the bottom, we have a feature called permeate flush. This consists of a solenoid, which is basically a water door that opens and closes when it receives a signal. This one happens to open when your atmospheric tank is full. What this does is it flushes your membranes, so that way when the RO system is in standby or is shut off, the membranes aren't sitting in dirty feed water. Instead, they're at rest in clean, pure RO water, which will only extend the life of the membranes and is sort of a default on our systems. It's just good practice for extending the longevity of the system. Also, sort of buried back in here, is our inlet solenoid. Again, solenoid, just a water door that opens and closes when it receives a signal. So when the system is off, that door is closed, which is what feeds the RO system. When the RO system needs to make water, that solenoid will open and allow the flow of water into the pump and through the RO system. And finally, what we recommend to be included with every RO system, every Defender RO system specifically, is our atmospheric tank. This atmospheric tank happens to be a 140-gallon tank. The dimensions are 29 inches wide by 58 inches tall. This is ideal for residential applications because it can fit through most standard 30 or 32 inch doorways. Identifying parts of the tank, down here we have our bulkhead. Our bottom bulkhead is ultimately what is going to go to the suction side of our Grundfos delivery pump. So all water that is delivered throughout the house or the business will be pulled from that bottom bulkhead. Further component identification on top, we have a 1/2 inch bulkhead. This will actually be our fill line. So coming off of the RO system, our 1/2 inch tubing will plug in right here, and that'll allow us to fill this RO tank. Spinning around to this side, we have our float junction box and also our float bulkhead and standpipe. So by default with these systems, we leave a lot of room for this float wire, and all of that float wire is coiled up inside the tank. Prior to installation, prior to actually bringing this system online, it's important that we recognize that this float needs to be reset to an appropriate length and to an appropriate depth, depending on your water requirements. Also, on top of the tank, we have our manway. So this allows us to open the top and peer into the inside of the tank. Hopefully you can see that float and all the coiled up wire there in the bottom. Also, on the manway, there is a vented lid, which allows atmospheric air to travel into the tank, which prevents a vacuum from forming. Hence the name atmospheric storage tank. Now, as water exits our atmospheric storage tank, it travels through the delivery pump, which is providing flow and pressure to all the points of use in the home or in the business. But the final stage of filtration for the entire whole house RO system is the onboard UV light. Because the water in this tank is subject to intermingling with atmospheric air, there of course is a risk of there being airborne bacteria. That risk is mitigated by use of the onboard UV disinfection light. UV actually works better the purer the water is. In this case, with RO water, the ultraviolet disinfection light can be extremely, extremely effective. Now that we've covered receiving, unboxing, high-level overview, and component identification of a basic whole house Defender RO system, next we'll go into the requirements for the environment and the mechanical room or basement or garage in which this RO system will be installed.